Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Thorne, and welcome to the Australian Aviation podcast. And I say podcast, but in many ways, this is now more than a podcast because for the first time in the 3.5 years we've been doing this, this is now being recorded for video as well. I wasn't really told about this before. This has kind of sprung on me. It was probably sprung on you as well, Chris. How do you feel about this?
I don't know how I feel about it. It was sprung on us at the last minute. Lucky I did my hair today.
Yeah. That's a joke.
Yeah.
For those of you who listen to the audio-only version.
I'm a bit concerned myself because video did kill the radio star, so I'm not sure what it's going to do to us.
No.
Ooh.
Well. Anyway, I should actually introduce probably that was the Chris there, the follically challenged Chris.
Yes.
And Jake, the non-follically challenged Jake.
The follically challenging.
Follically challenging. Well, talking of something... No, I'm not even going to do that, Link. I'm not even going to do that. Right, let's get on to the first news story.
Let's do it.
Let's get into this. Now, on the podcast, a few weeks ago, we were talking about Air New Zealand and their youth hostel bunk beds that they're installing, or the Skynest, as the PR team are calling it, which is essentially on their longer flights, the people, the povos in economy can go and lie in these bunk beds in Air New Zealand. It's an absolute revolution. No one's ever done this before. And obviously those people are wrong. It's just youth hostel bunk beds.
But they haven't done it on a plane before.
They haven't done it on a plane before for good reason, because anything worse than being in youth hostel bunk beds is being on youth hostel bunk beds in the air. So there's a good reason. And we
I
all
don't
had a
know.
row about this.
I'd still say that being stuck in the back row between two people on a red eye is worse than a youth hostel bunk bed on a plane.
I've been in some very nice youth hostels, to be fair, in my younger days. Youth hostels are very, very nice.
They suit a purpose.
Anyway, the point is that Air New Zealand, the big thing of this was a complete revolution in the sky. And so Qantas have come back with a similar-ish idea. So when Qantas launched Project Sunrise, as I'm sure you'll all be aware, which is their direct flights from London and New York to the major eastern cities of Australia, they will use a new fleet of A350-1000s. They're buying 12 of these, and they will fly for up to 20 hours at a time. So in order to combat the stiffness that you might get, they have installed a stretching area, or the wellness zone. And why do they have such stupid names for the wellness zone?
Tell us what you think.
It is stupid. I'm sorry, I don't mean horrible, but it's stupid.
Well, you're not going to call it the sickness zone, are you?
No, you can't. No.
That's just economy is what that is, the sickness zone.
We are, for the benefit of those who are listening to the audio-only version of this, the wellness zone, it's like a corner of the A350, and there's a TV screen which apparently will be showing like fitness videos and stuff, and there's like some sort of padded handles you can hold on to do your stretching, and there's obviously they've lit it all quite nice and stuff as well.
Snacks and water is
there's
going to
also
be provided.
yeah, there's also snacks and water around the corner. I think this is a gimmick. However, in the interest of a balanced discussion, I might be wrong. I'm going to start with you, Chris. As a person that has been a cabin crew manager, that has run the cabin with an iron fist, and that has seen people that get, that do need to go and stretch their legs midair, what do you think of this idea?
Gimmick.
There we go.
Gimmick.
But you were all for what your friends, I'm sure you're still on the payroll at Air New Zealand in their bunk beds. You thought that was good, but this wasn't good. What's the difference?
I just don't see it being of any benefit.
No.
And a lot of airlines now have in-flight videos encouraging customers how to stretch in their seats or create movement to ensure DVT doesn't kick in or any other issues that could arise on a long-haul flight. But kind of encouraging customers to get up and go and stretch their legs. I get it. It's a 20-hour non-stop flight. Far too long to be locked in a metal tube, in my own opinion. However, I get that there needs to be a certain health and safety aspect that these airlines flying these long-haul routes or ultra-long-haul routes need to consider. But I just can't see it working. And what happens, if 15 people want to get up at the one time? And further to that, is there a seat there? Should a seatbelt sign come on immediately? Or I've been on plenty of flights where the captain has literally turned the seatbelt sign on and come on the PA straight away saying all passengers and crew be seated immediately.
So, I mean, that is the issue, is if you're contorting your body into some strange position doing one of these stretches, and the next thing you know, you hit a bit of turbulence.
Yep.
Surely that is a recipe for
disaster.
Mid-air accidents.
Exactly
I don't know.
right.
It'd really help the yoga, probably.
Well,
Just
maybe.
being shaken into new positions that you never even tried.
But
True.
Jake has unique insight, because Jake is a man that, outside of this job, likes to sing and dance. You've been in many musicals. You're a man that likes to be on your feet, that likes to move about. How do you see this working?
I mean, yeah. Look, again, I feel like I'm playing devil's advocate again for the second week in a row, and you guys are sitting on the opposite side of the table.
Yeah, it's very confrontational.
It's a very
they set this up.
adversarial style of podcast that we have going on now. But I don't know. It's never been tried before.
True.
It's never been tried. It may work
Possibly
very
for
well.
a good reason.
But well, I mean, one of the reasons is nobody has been insane enough to fly 20-hour flights before. But if you're on a 20-hour flight and there's a place where you can go and, stretch your legs and, I don't know, maybe do a couple of proper stretches and have a snack and some water outside your seat and, get up for a little while, it might be nice. It's worth trying, I think.
So one of the points of the stretching area is it will be between premium and premium economy, and will be available for all people on the aircraft to use. The people in first, though, even though they technically can use it, they will have their own suites, their own rooms. So
They have a lie-down bed.
yeah, exactly. So they won't be sullying themselves
No.
with this. So I
And
understand
they have room in their suite to do their own
Exactly.
stretches or downward dog if that's what they wish to do.
Well, anyway, on that note, let's move on to the
Move on
next-
from the gimmick.
Move on from the gimmick. So, more broadly, we have seen that. So that is obviously that is Project Sunrise is ultra long haul done properly. But in the meantime, what Qantas have been doing is experimenting with ultra long haul routes flown by their 787 Dreamliners. Now, we'll go into all the detail of this in a moment, but about a year ago, almost a year ago, Air New Zealand launched their direct flight from Auckland to New York using their Dreamliner. The whole thing ended up being a little bit of a disaster, you could argue, in that they had a lot of trouble with, it's meant to be obviously direct, where they thought they might have to have a stopover, where they had to kind of literally take luggage off the plane, where they had to ask people not to get on there because it weighed too much and essentially couldn't make the journey in the event of bad weather, in the event they'd have to redirect their flight path. That was an absolute palaver. And now Qantas have come in and launched their own, the same route from Auckland, New York, using the same aircraft. However, they cannily are putting a lot less people on it. But anyway, nonetheless, this is the restart of flights from Australia, because it will go, I think, from Sydney to Auckland and then on to New York. Jake, tell us everything we need to know about this.
Yeah, so this is the first time that Qantas has flown to New York since COVID. They used to fly through LAX. They are now going through Auckland. So you fly across to Auckland, you have a stop in Auckland, and then it's like a 16-hour, 15-minute shot straight to New York with no stops in the middle. So Qantas now has 3 of the world's longest flights. Perth to London, Dallas to Melbourne, Auckland to New York. They're using their Dreamliners. It'll go 3 times per week, increasing to 4 from October, more than 1,800 seats per week. And this is a bit of a change for Qantas, who, by the way, have come under a little bit of fire from the Flight Attendants Union because they on the Auckland to New York leg, they are using New Zealand-based crews as opposed to Australian crews, and the Flight Attendants Union has accused them of doing this because the New Zealand crews voted to lower their rest requirements. But in a statement, Qantas has said that no, these crews are getting a minimum like 49 hours of rest in New York over 2 nights. So it's got echoes of the whole Finnair thing from a little earlier in the year. But essentially, you can now fly Qantas from Sydney or to New York without having to deal with LAX and all that LAX entails.
One of the interesting things about this, and there will be people listening to what I'm going to say now and that will not necessarily agree with it, is the use of the 787 Dreamliner, which on the one hand it's mostly meant to be a workhorse long-haul airline. That's what it is. It isn't as big as the A380. It doesn't go as far as the upcoming 777X. It's kind of your workhorse international airline. However, it has the ability to do these ultra-long haul routes, but it can only really do them if it limits the amount of people are in the air. And so the problem that Air New Zealand had is that they launched this route and they said that they did all of the research and they used their algorithms and their computers and whatever it was to work out the maximum amount of people they could get on this aircraft and still do that route without any trouble. But obviously they had an awful lot of problems. When Air New Zealand launched the route, they were very, I wouldn't say cocky, that's going too far, but Greg Foran, the CEO, there was some quote where he's like, we're wave to Qantas as we take off because they beat them to it by 8 months. It all seemed to go a little bit horribly wrong. They then doubled down and said that despite these issues, they did pick the right aircraft to do the flight. However, they will be receiving some new aircraft in a couple of years, which will fix the issue. So it's a kind of a sorry, not sorry. We got it wrong, but we didn't. But Qantas cannily will not have this problem because they are flying with significantly less people, almost like they knew this was a problem in advance and they didn't fall into the trap.
So what I will say, and I guess I'll put my former Air New Zealand hat on. When Air New Zealand launched the route, they did launch the route knowing that the aircraft wouldn't operate full. In the economy cabin, they restricted the number of passengers on board. Did they necessarily get that number of passengers on board correct? Not necessarily, in my own opinion. And I know just prior to me exiting Air New Zealand, they did reevaluate that number and make some changes. What Air New Zealand couldn't predict, though, and it's impossible for any airline to predict this, is winds on the flight, weather on the flight, things like that.
I don't want to pick an argument here. Particularly as we're very close.
We are very close.
I don't necessarily think you're saying, there's no way they could have known, which is what Air New Zealand was saying. They said we did all the preparation. They say this, but Qantas somehow were able to know. And Qantas have got into this with their standard setup, carrying significantly less passengers.
What Qantas have in their favour is they'd already launched and had experience with Perth, London.
Yes, but
so they'd already taken out the teething issues there. They also had, when they first launched A380 flights between Sydney and Dallas, Qantas, pre-COVID, many years ago when the A380 entered service, a lot of people at Qantas said it was the wrong aircraft. It couldn't make it. It was too long, etc. Now, that aircraft in the first 12 months of operation diverted to Fiji numerous times because of weather or fuel issues or something going wrong that Qantas hadn't foreseen or predicted. So Qantas had a bit of knowledge or education behind them.
I do get your point. And I don't want to be very cynical. What Chris is referring to particularly is they had the Perth to London ultra long haul route, which they've made a massive success of. They didn't really have any of these kind of problems. I do suggest that one of the C-suite executives at Air New Zealand could have bought a ticket on one of those flights and gone and experienced themselves and maybe noted down the amount of passengers on that plane. I don't necessarily think the kind of intelligence that Qantas had, Air New Zealand couldn't have quite easily obtained. The accusation is that they tried their luck a bit too much.
Look, did they try their luck a bit too quick? In my opinion, yes.
Yes.
You will not get an argument out of me on that. Are they doing well on the route? Yes, they are. Will this see some really good competition on the route? Absolutely, most definitely. And that's a win for the passengers. It's a win for our listeners. It's a win for the travelling public. But watch this space because Qantas will have an issue on this route. There will be unfavourable winds. There will be a cyclone somewhere leading into North America that will have Qantas having to divert around winds or cyclones or weather. Jake's putting his finger up. Go for it.
Yeah, just on a little bit of facts and figures here. The 787-9s that Qantas is using will be carrying 236 passengers. Air New Zealand has a 275-seat configuration, but passenger numbers capped at 180. I will say, by the way, I believe the Air New Zealand flights, the Dreamliners, will be having the Skynests eventually. So that's nice.
They will.
But the Qantas has also said, so Alan Joyce says that the plane will have more room and fewer seats than, quote, most of the competitors, and has been designed with long-haul travel in mind. Qantas has also said it's using an advanced cloud-based flight planning system that models flight paths,
that's exciting,
measuring
isn't it?
flight
Yeah.
times and
Fancy.
winds to determine the optimal route. And as you've noted in the story, Adam, Air New Zealand's problems were often caused by having to lengthen the flight path to avoid bad weather.
I thought this was very interesting, these quotes, because it was the communications that Qantas sent out were written very carefully in the sense that they made no reference to Air New Zealand. They made no reference to all these problems. They make these kind of these quite pointed quotes, which was quite interesting because they've launched many routes over the last 2 years post-COVID. They've never referred to potential issues you could see before. It was, I would imagine Alan Joyce was very much enjoying this because Greg Coram was very, and again, not cocky, but he did like to rub in the fact they got there first. Now Alan Joyce has, you could argue yet again, had the last laugh.
But has he?
But has he? Okay, welcome back. So, without wanting to talk too much about a future podcast, but I think one we are recording tomorrow, Jake, we are going to have an interview with Air New Zealand's, I think, longest
serving flight attendant.
Tell us a little bit more about this. Give us a bit of a preview.
So his name is Ron Twine. He's 74 years old. He has been with Air New Zealand for 53 years. He joined in 1970 at 21 years old. He has this week worked his last flight, flying from Vancouver to Auckland. 5 decades in the sky. He's, seen so many celebs. He met his wife working for New Zealand. He's made lifelong friends. He said that passengers and crew have come to his wedding. He says he's made so many friends over the course of his half a century career. Chris, you were with Air New Zealand? Did you know Ron Twine?
I didn't know Ron Twine personally. However, I have been on a flight that Ron has worked. So what I will say, kia ora, Ron, and enjoy your retirement, and mate wa.
Do you reckon when he worked with you that he would have known the celebrity you would go on to become, this
No.
incredibly powerful figure in
No,
the
he
industry?
probably looked at me and went, "Oh, another bloody staff traveller."
Yeah, you weren't
Sit down and be quiet.
mentioned in the press release
No,
among all the celebrities.
no. They clearly don't know who I am.
No, they don't.
No.
On that note, we should move on to the next topic. So before the break, we were talking about ultra long haul travel, and I think you mentioned that Qantas now has 3 of the longest routes in the world. One of them that I think they launched for the first time last year was their flights from Perth to Rome. Now, these are very clever because one, it was a flight to mainland Europe, but secondly, Qantas, and kind of kudos to the sort of marketing team for this, is that they did it in such a way that you could book return from Perth to Rome, but you could mix it up with a London flight. So what you could do is, say, fly to London, have a week in London, travel around Europe, end up back in Rome, and then fly back to Perth. That has been renewed for next year as well. Jake, tell us a little bit more about this, because this is a flagship route for Qantas.
Yeah, so Perth to Rome has been brought back for this season. So they're going to be flying 3 times per week between Perth and Rome until October. That's more than 22,000 seats over 4 months. Early July, we're going to see the flights for 2024 going on sale, and that will extend the route into the 3rd year of operation. Some figures from last year, this was one of the most popular international routes in 2022. Over the month of July last year, it saw 97.7% seat utilization on inbound services. 91.9% on outbound services. Also the only direct route between Australia and continental Europe.
It is extraordinary how successful that was. Now, some of those extraordinary numbers were that kind of post-COVID pent-up demand. A lot of people that flew last summer, that would have been their first kind of long-haul trip post-COVID. But nonetheless, that's incredible because to give you sort of context, and it does vary, if you're an airline and you want to make money, you need to be selling out at least kind of 80% of those seats,
Absolutely.
75, 80% of those seats. To get to that kind of number is almost unheard of. And also keep in mind that the reason it isn't probably 100% is that you can usually always get one seat on a plane if you want to spend enough money. And airlines will tend to leave some leniency that if somebody wants to do that. So effectively, for months, every single seat was booked. It is almost certainly the most successful flight in Qantas's history. There's probably many different ways you could argue that, but certainly as a one-off route, it was an absolute game changer.
Well, absolutely. And I think, back to when I was a wee lad, Qantas used to fly to Frankfurt, to Rome, to Paris, to a number of European cities. And then as things progressed, they kind of slowly dropped out of continental Europe and focused on London. And this is what I guess this is where the Middle Eastern carriers and Asian carriers have been successful, that operate via a hub into continental Europe. Aussies don't want to go to London to get to Europe. London is like LA Airport for me. Avoid, avoid, avoid. If you're not going, and I know no insult to the motherland.
Get out.
No insult to the motherland. But if you're not going to spend time in the UK, why would you transit London?
Yeah.
So Qantas is effectively forcing customers to transit London in order to get to greater continental Europe with their codeshare partners. Opening up Italy or opening up Rome, and Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that press release also mentioned that they've got plans to launch Paris again from East Coast or something.
I didn't see that in the press release.
They are. I think they are, because they've got one more 787 due to arrive in the next few weeks, which means they're going to have three more 787s than they had last year. They are in discussions about potentially launching a Paris route. So, like Chris says there, that they're essentially aiming to, or they're looking at the possibility of having London, Paris, and Rome as their three destinations.
Yeah, absolutely.
As an aside as well, by the way, something that came out very recently as well is Turkish Airlines is in conversations with Sydney and Melbourne to operate flights to Istanbul. So
Melbourne won.
Did they?
Yep, Melbourne won. They announced it yesterday, I think. So commencing, I think it's December this year, potentially.
Well, there you go. You heard it here, maybe second. But getting back to Qantas, it was mentioned by Cam Wallace, the CEO of Qantas International, that one of the trends they've seen post-COVID is preference for direct flights is higher than ever. And he's saying strong customer demand for long-haul international routes that's what's gave them the confidence to recommit to this for 2024. One
of the interesting things is we've spoken on the podcast before about Project Sunrise, just to go back, and whether punters essentially would want to put up with being in economy for 20 hours. But Qantas, one of the reasons they're investing so heavily in that is the success of these routes, is seeing how well London to Perth did, and how people would, and I don't want to use the phrase put up with, but seem more than happy to do ultra long haul routes rather than having the stopover. I personally prefer a stopover, but it looks like from what Qantas is seeing, I'm very much in the minority.
Oh, look, personally, I prefer a stopover, kind of my limit now on an aircraft, 7-8 hours, and I'm like, give me off. But
we shouldn't really be saying this on an aviation podcast. You just said here on an aviation podcast, 7-8 hours, I want to get off the aircraft.
I want to get off the aircraft. I'm happy to then get off, stretch my legs, have a shower, freshen up, and then I'm happy to get back
on the aircraft.
But by the 7 or 8 hour mark, I'm like, okay, because I don't sleep on an aircraft.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm not one of these people that can just get on and like put their head against something and fall asleep straight away. I envy those people. Now, is it because I was cabin crew for so long? I'm so used to being alert on an aircraft. But when I'm on board, I can't just even when I'm up the pointy end. So I guess I've been ruined there. So 7 or 8 hours is about my limit now. And then I want to get off, stretch my legs, maybe even have an overnight stop somewhere. But I'm happy to get back on the aircraft to continue a journey. But just an ultra long haul has no appeal to me.
Jake, where do you stand on this? Do you think ultra long haul is the way forward, or do you think people are going to want to have a stopover?
I think, and to be absolutely boring, I think there's a real market for both.
God, that's the last thing we want on this show.
I
is
know-
strong
I-
opinions.
we want division. We want people who I think ultra long haul flights are literally Satan. I think the business travelers especially are going to want to the ultra long haul because they can be at their destination as quickly as possible. I think for more casual travelers and holiday makers. The ultra long haul flights are going to be more expensive, and so if you get a stopover in Singapore or Dubai or whatever, that's going to knock a fair few $100s off the cost. And as Chris is saying, you also get off and spread your legs in an episode. In an airport like Changi or Dubai, which crammed with services. I've been to Dubai airport; it's absolutely insane. I flew in there in middle of the night, and everything was still open and
city
buzzing.
within a city.
It is. So there's definitely a market for both, and we're seeing with places like Changi, and Changi is a destination in itself, really.
Absolutely, beautiful airport.
When Alan Joyce was talking about buying the 12 A350 to do Project Sunrise, one of the points he made, which was really clever, is almost no other airline in the world could do this. Perhaps Air New Zealand potentially have a similar thing because obviously Australia and New Zealand are a long, long way away from a lot of other major OECD countries. And so only Qantas would want to buy 12 of these aircraft and can therefore get the better deal and get the economies of scale. And so ironically, Qantas and to a lesser extent Air New Zealand, despite being relatively smaller airlines, are arguably doing the most exciting things in global aviation right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all that being said, I do have to say these ultra long haul flights, anything that helps you avoid LAX, I'm all for.
I agree. London and LAX, avoid.
There's nothing wrong with Heathrow's a good airport.
Not if you're transiting. If you're stopping and going to visit family or friends in the motherland, absolutely, it's a great airport. But if you're having to transit London to get to Frankfurt or Paris or somewhere else, hell no, avoid.
For those people listening to the audio-only track, Chris is looking at me with a disgusted look. It really is. I mean, I'm not angry, I'm disappointed that you say this.
I loved flying into London, but my end destination was London.
Exactly. I mean, what? Sorry, what?
But if you're going beyond the UK and you're purely there for a transit, LA and Heathrow airports are the worst two airports for a transit.
Okay, welcome back. So we've had a couple of news stories this week. We've seen that after a kind of a year, 18 months where the international recovery has been quite slow, it does now seem to be coming back to life. We ran a story, Jake, about Melbourne and how their recovery is going. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so Melbourne Airport is seeing a real pickup again in international traffic. After quite a long lag. Melbourne Airport has in May 2023 hit 87.6% of its pre-pandemic international traffic. So I've got the raw figures here. There was 3,784 flights. May 2023. That's compared with 1,780 in May 2022. 744,868 passengers. So that's 87.6% again of 2019 and 103% of May 2022. So it's definitely getting back up towards a full recovery. And you're seeing airlines like Qantas being very bullish on international recovery as well.
One of the interesting things is about a year or so ago, one of the predictions that kept coming up was that international travel wouldn't fully recover from COVID until the end of 2024. And they predicted that essentially domestic travel or short-haul travel would recover a lot quicker. But what we're actually seeing is that domestic travel, that recovery is stagnating. A lot of that is due to the kind of cost of living crisis where maybe you wouldn't cancel a holiday, but that business trip or the short-haul trip you may well put to one side. And so domestic travel is kind of getting to that kind of 90% point is roughly staying there. But it feels like international travel is recovering quicker than the kind of doomsday predictions a year ago. It looks like actually now we may see a near full recovery by early next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what the Australian aviation sector failed to note or I guess really look at was how quick international recovery bounced back in other parts of the world that opened up before Australia. it bounced back really quick. And I guess, you know, in that true Aussie spirit, have passport, will travel. Passport is like a birthright in Australia. It's, you know...
One of the interesting things as well is seeing that we're having a much better recovery this year than we had last year. Is that, and I used to say this during COVID, we are not epidemiologists. We're not going to talk about COVID, but nonetheless, Australia's response to COVID by shutting its borders, particularly, and for lockdowns that went on longer or finished a lot later than a lot of other countries. Again, whether you agree or not with that, it would clearly have put off a lot of tourists visiting this country because, unlike particularly then, you know, people in the UK the POMs were quite soft, right? And so, whereas Aussies are quite fearless with international travel and they will just get on a plane and go somewhere, a lot of people in the UK, and I hope no one from back home listens to this, they'll be like, "Oh, it's a once in a lifetime trip. It's so far. It's 24 hours. Have you heard that? 24 hours. Such a long trip, that one." And so, if you are of that POM mindset, you may well have been concerned about flying to Australia last year.
Absolutely.
Whereas now, I think with that sort of threat gone, we're seeing maybe a delayed response, but now it feels like it's really turbocharging.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's exciting that it's bouncing back as quick as it is. It's what I would like to start seeing happening now is it's about high time prices start to drop. And I think airlines are starting to kind of see that and loads are starting to kind of plateau and become more stable, and there's less of a I need to travel now demand. So,
well, on what you were saying about the pommy mindset, Adam, there's an old joke that sprung to mind.
Be careful.
Yeah, how can you tell that the plane is full of pommies?
Go on.
The whining keeps going even after the engines stop.
I quite like that, actually. That's quite good. I quite like that. Yeah.
Like that.
Shifting a bit further north, by the way, on the international subject of international travel, Jetstar has dropped a bombshell this week up in Brisbane. Huge expansion to its Brisbane operations. It's 500,000 new low-fare seats per year out of Brisbane Airport to several international destinations. Now, part of this is Jetstar is stopping its route from the Gold Coast to Tokyo Narita. It is shifting that service to Brisbane. It will also commence new direct flights from Brisbane to Osaka, direct flights to Seoul Incheon, and it will up the frequency of existing flights to Bali and Auckland. And as well as that, it will be putting its new A321neos on several of these routes. So this is a big expansion for Jetstar out of Brisbane.
It feels as well that one of the other things we're seeing is that we are seeing the slow introduction of more low-cost fares and more sales tickets, which at the end of last year we were not seeing. There's an element of Jetstar's kind of what could be a successful period for them is that in much the same way that Hollywood loves a recession, so a low-cost carrier may well be enjoying a bit of an economic downturn because clearly these are routes as similar to what Virgin and Qantas could put on. But I think a lot of people will be more tempted to not necessarily scrap their holiday, but do it via a low-cost carrier.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with the cost of living crisis happening now, if you can save a fair whack of money on flights, that means a nicer accommodation choice, or it means you've got leeway to budget for that tour that you want to do in destination. So, look, I think it's a clever move from Jetstar, moving so many of the operations and upgauging Brisbane to the level that they've done. But I guess it also highlights that here in Sydney, the slot issue. Linking it back to something we spoke about last week or the week before in the podcast, the slot issue just constrains Sydney. So good on Brisbane Airport, good on Melbourne Airport for welcoming all these new airlines in.
Just on the low-cost thing, by the way, just a quick note from Boeing's commercial market outlook, which was released just a few days ago. The outlook predicts that the low-cost market will operate more than 40% of the single-aisle jet market in 2042, which is up from 10% 20 years ago. So low-cost carriers are definitely growing at a rapid clip.
Absolutely.
So Boeing are predicting more than 42,000 new jets sold worldwide by 2042. So they are... Is this a positive prediction? It feels like Boeing feel that they're going to come out of the other end of their recent trouble.
Well, I think it's not just Boeing. I think it's just jets in general.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But it's saying, some of the findings in the report is, passenger traffic is continuing to outpace global economic growth. The global fleet nearly doubling to 48,600 jets, expanding 3.5% per year. Airlines are also a lot of these new jet sales are coming with older planes being replaced by newer, more fuel efficient and greener models. Like the A321neo, like the 737 MAX family.
What both Boeing and Airbus were very clever at doing is that they understood that this idea of economies of scale is not really a thing anymore, because obviously we had the kind of a rise of the A380 and of course the 747 before that. And the biggest reason these aircrafts were successful was because obviously if you can pack more people on a plane, then you're going to be able to make more money. But in a world where you have more options and you have more flights, it was very hard to fill these aircraft, and so therefore both Boeing and Airbus went for these more fuel efficient jets. But it is also extraordinary that they are managing to persuade so many airlines to spend quite a lot of money on radically changing their fleets. You're going to have Qantas pretty much do away with most, if not all, of their 737s and move to more fuel efficient Airbuses. You've got Virgin, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second. They are rating the delivery of quite a lot of Maxes. And of course, we've got Bonza as well, embrace these new aircraft. So whoever you fly with in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to have a very different experience.
Yeah, exactly. And the 737 MAX, now that it's hopefully past its teething problems, we're going to see a lot more of, because Virgin Australia finally, they will be popping champers over at Virgin head offices. They will finally get their first 737 MAX 8 by the end of the month. That is VH8IA, dubbed Monkey Mia. We saw it doing some test flights around the Washington area. That is to say Washington State, late last month. But now Virgin have come out and said it is on its way. It will be on its way from Seattle by the end of the month. They are finally getting their MAX 8, not quickly enough to put it straight away on the Tokyo Haneda route. That is still going to be the 777 for the time being. But it is definitely coming. And after some time flying domestically to familiarize the crews and pass the regulatory inspections, the MAX 8 Monkey Mia will be pressed into service on Cairns to Tokyo straight away.
Well, on that positive note, I was trying to think of a monkey-style pun, but none could come to mind.
We haven't
quickly.
gone bananas.
That was a very appealing one.
Well, I mean, there you go. A new format, same tired old jokes from this show. We will wrap things up now. But we want your comments. We want your opinions. If
Absolutely.
you are viewing this on YouTube, we want to know how it's gone down. We also, because this was sort of, sprung on us a little bit at the last minute, we are going to try and personalise this studio a bit more.
Yes, we will.
Think about things. Chris is going to get a haircut for the next episode, but we will. This is the first time we've done this, so we're going to try and kind of.
They could have filmed last week when we had the models on display for the photo shoot that we did.
Yes.
A quick shout out, by the way, speaking of models.
Thank you. Yes, we are.
Speaking of models, kudos to Orbex Simulation Systems, the geniuses who, and I say this completely sincerely, the geniuses who were responsible for the overhaul of Australia and Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. They have just put out an intricate recreation of Melbourne Tullamarine Airport.
It looks incredible, I should say.
It looks you
really
look
good.
at these pictures and it's really hard to tell it's not really Melbourne Airport. I mean, you've got photorealistic buildings, you've got cars on the streets, street lights, elevated roadways, interior modeling of the departure lounges. I've never played Flight Simulator. I don't know if you can go inside the departure lounges. Maybe it's something you can just see through the windows in the game, but they've really pulled out all the stops.
They have.
I mean, I think every single taxiway light is in exactly the right position. So well done to Orbex. Hats off to you guys.
So we did. I think it was 18 months ago. I think it was my Hannah, who used to present my show. She did an interview with Orbex, and they are incredible because they're obviously incredibly talented designers, but they're also massive av geeks as well. And Orbex started off kind of releasing their own kind of like patches or upgrades to Microsoft Flight Simulator where they would upgrade various different cities. They now work with Microsoft themselves for their official updates. And what they do is a labour of love. It's very, very impressive.
Yep. Looks amazing. So good shout out.
Good shout, yes. On that note, we will wrap things up, but now I will say goodbye to my two co-hosts. Chris, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Goodbye, everyone.
And Jake, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Adam.
And we will be back the same time next week on all different formats.
Wave to the camera.
Wave to the camera. Oh, that's cringe, isn't it? Oh God. Let's just end this now.
And watch out for the podcast interview as well with Ron Twine from Air New Zealand. That is going to be a cracker.
That will be coming up very soon. But from now, for us three, goodbye.